Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sampson Lee with a chapter reading from the book Bound and Gagged by the Thin Blue Line, Sexual Assault, Harassment, and the Broken System Sworn to Protect and Serve. The material in this chapter comes less than a week after I was told the investigation was over. Tuesday, December 18th, 2012. Meeting with Blackwell. As scheduled, I met with Blackwell in his office at 9 a.m. A notebook was stuffed in my purse. Anita had warned me not to use a notepad from work to take notes. Apparently one had been confiscated from an employee after a disciplinary meeting because it was considered county property. Duly noted. I sat in my usual spot across from Blackwell and started right in. I am not satisfied with the outcome of your investigation. I motioned finger quotes around investigation to enhance my point. He leaned back in his chair. The mostly closed blinds covered the windows perpendicular to both of us, his left, my right. I'm surprised it ended so abruptly, I continued. There was hardly enough time to investigate anything. Blackwell regurgitated what he had written in his email about meeting with members of the sheriff's office, county attorney's office, and people in court administration. No one else has had problems with Sergeant Coons, he added. In fact, it seems people like him. But this isn't about whether other people have had issues with him or like him. He sexually assaulted me. He didn't respond. He just sat there and looked at me. I had more to say. If you're so interested in other people, what about the documentation Anita submitted about Coons stalking and harassing her? Out of the corner of my eye, I could see shadows of people walking past the windows. Is that Coons? Denise? Cole? Blackwell crossed his arms and paused for a moment. That happened too long ago. Too long ago? So are you saying it doesn't count? Doesn't matter? That's not right. Too long ago. There was no pause this time, and his voice had a slightly higher volume. I raised mine to match. It clearly shows a pattern of behavior that is relevant now, but regardless, his crime against me can stand alone. I shifted in my seat, and the conversation followed. And what about the other women who came forward, like you asked? No one came forward, he claimed. Interesting, because I talked to one of the victims myself. I heard her story. She said she was going to call you. No one came forward, he repeated. Bullshit. I suddenly felt a shiver. I pulled the arms of my sweater down over my palms and clutched the cuffs tightly with my bent fingers. My hands were always cold. Blackwell was one of those athletic guys who never seemed to be bothered by temperature. So what did you do, I asked. Is anything going to happen to Coons? I yelled at Sergeant Coons about his inappropriate behavior. For a moment, he sounded like the Blackwell who had genuinely wanted to make this right 11 days earlier when he said, I'm not one of those guys who's going to sweep this under the rug. Even his tone changed back to that time. He leaned forward in his chair and lightly slapped his hand on the desk. Laid into him and made him cry. He pointed at my chair. He sat right there where you're sitting and cried. I cringed at the thought of sitting in the same chair as Coons. And at the same time, I felt the urge to correct the weak verbiage of inappropriate behavior Blackwell was using to gloss over sexual assault. Instead, I released the grip of my sweater sleeves, nodded, and hoped he would continue talking. He did. Sergeant Coons never denied what took place. He didn't say anything bad about you either, and that says a lot to me. There's nothing to deny. I've been telling the truth all along, I countered. With that, Blackwell leaned back in his chair and reverted back to the role of Cole's mouthpiece. A letter containing directives will be going into his file, and because of what happened, we will be scheduling a department-wide mandatory training session that addresses the topic of inappropriate behavior. Again, the watered-down language. As my hands rested on my lap, I spun my wedding ring in circles around my finger with my right thumb and index finger. The ring itself did not bring a sense of comfort. Rather, I hoped the distraction would help bring a sense of calm to keep both my hands and my voice from shaking with anger. And what are those directives? I mean, besides what everyone else has to do because of his actions. Sergeant Coons will not be allowed to go to the District 2 office without being accompanied by the sheriff, myself, or one of the other sergeants. Spin, spin. So how disciplinary action is confidential, he said, cutting me off. This is not to be made public. You are not to talk about it with anyone. Now he sounds like Denise. I was confused. So, how's it supposed to work if Coons isn't allowed in the District 2 office without supervision, yet no one knows he's not supposed to be there unsupervised? He ignored the question. This is to be kept confidential, he said. I continued. But if nobody knows, it doesn't mean a damn thing. I wondered if Coons even knew. Blackwell straightened up, leaned forward, crossed his hockey player arms, and rested his elbows on the desk as he continued to look at me, not saying a word. I was not intimidated and gazed right back. Look, Coons needs help. He's a predator with zero impulse control. A letter in his file won't give him the help he needs. He shouldn't be around women. He is dangerous, period. Is he getting help? That, too, is confidential. Spin, spin, spin. I straightened up and leaned forward to match his move. I am not happy with your so-called investigation. I want an outside agency to conduct a real one. And one more thing, I want an audit done on my DVS record to see if Coons has ever accessed my personal information. If Coons had queried my name, it would have been in violation of the policies of the Department of Vehicle Services, a division of the Department of Public Safety, which oversees the electronic warehouse of citizens' private information for public safety use. When law enforcement users undergo online training, they must agree they will not misuse the system, and they must confirm they understand the repercussions if they do. Blackwell leaned back and looked at me with wide brown eyes that resembled trepidation. He seemed caught off guard and nervous. I will have the audit conducted and tell you the results, he replied. I let go of my ring, put my hands on the arms of my chair and squeezed, and leaned back too. Coons has power issues and a total lack of self-control. He's a scary person who needs some serious help. It warranted repeating. He rolled his chair back and began to stand up. The investigation is done. I wasn't ready to be done. Like I said, I want an outside agency to conduct an investigation. He didn't respond, he just stood there. After holding his gaze for a few silent seconds, I asked, "So that's it then?" "Yep, investigation is over." I was fuming on my drive back to Hinckley. The power dynamics were exhausting. I was full of so many questions that had no justifiable answers. The sheriff's office had staged a full-blown cover-up. Blackwell basically looked me in the eye and said I didn't matter, that women didn't matter, that those in charge could do whatever the fuck they wanted. When I pulled into the lot, I was happy to see Sergeant Meyer's vehicle. The bells jingled as I opened the door. Meyer did not look up when he heard the bells, as he did paperwork at his desk, with his back to the doorway to his office. He wasn't paranoid like I was. I walked past, then backtracked and knocked on the metal outlining the door frame. "Smoke break?" I asked. He was game. As he put his jacket on, I walked to my desk and grabbed the cigarettes from our community drawer. It wasn't super cold for December, but I still felt the bite. I couldn't tell whether I was shivering from anger or the weather. "Can I ask you something?" I handed him a cigarette and the lighter once I was done with it. Then I put on my cheap knit gloves, the kind that look like they're made for a kid until they are stretched onto adult hands. "Sure, what do you got?" he asked, as he tilted his head back and blew smoke up to the sky. "I was told about Coons' directive for our office. Can you please watch out for me up here?" He brought his head back down and turned to look at me. "Directive? What directive?" "That he can't come up here without supervision by the sheriff, chief, or another sergeant." "I don't know what you're talking about." At this point, it was clear I was shivering from anger. "Are you fucking kidding me? I just got back from a meeting with Blackwell where he straight up told me that Coons can't be up here without supervision. Your supervision. And you don't even know about it?" I knew that directive doesn't mean shit. I flicked the long, idle ash off my Marlboro, inhaled deeply, and exhaled smoke entangled in exasperation. Meyer drove the point home. I was never told about it. "And I was directed not to tell you or anyone. Blackwell said discipline is confidential." He inhaled his last puff with a squinted right eye and shook his head as he blew out the result. "Fucking Coons," he growled. He squished the butt into its smallest form and lobbed it into the overflowing coffee can that rested at his feet. Only about 2/3 done, I bent over and extinguished mine in a small, dirty snow pile on the corner of the deck, then set the butt in the metal can. We went back inside. Meyer took a right turn into his office, and I walked straight back to my desk, took off my gloves and winter coat, and sat down. "Do they think this is all just a big fucking joke?" I said to myself, but loud enough for Meyer to hear. He sighed loud enough for my ears. Though I was told to keep the alleged discipline confidential, I worried for my safety more intensely now. Each time Coons was not held accountable for his behavior, it served as a permission slip to continue and escalate his game. 0 consequences. I assumed getting away with the next violation would be an even bigger turn-on for him. And so I told every deputy I saw that day about the directive and asked for help. "Please let me know if you see Coons in our office, with or without supervision." I knew the rest of the deputies would learn of my request through the fertile grapevine. My safety was more important than the administration's stupid secret. No matter how much they tried to force me to participate in their cover-up, I refused. I also refused to leave. On a practical level, I couldn't. I was in no position to quit this job right now. Even with access to the joint banking account, there were still bills to pay, and I needed income so Eric wouldn't continue to have total control over me. Not to mention, I didn't want to leave because I loved working with my friends. We were becoming a family, or they were welcoming me into theirs. Most importantly, I had to see this through and do everything I could to stop Coons, no matter what.